In this episode, you will discover the one thing that can help you navigate divorce with control, empowerment, and confidence without escalating conflict.
Welcome to Women Winning Divorce, the podcast helping successful women navigate divorce with dignity so you can protect yourself, your children, and your assets. I'm Heather Quick, founding attorney at Florida Women's Law Group, where women win at life.
Welcome to this week's episode of Women Winning Divorce. I'm Heather Quick, owner and attorney at Florida Women's Law Group. Today, Stacy Phillips is joining us. She is a nationally recognized family law practitioner with nearly 40 years of experience handling high net worth and high profile divorce cases. And she's the author of Divorce, It's All About Control, a respected commentator and a leading advocate in the field. Today, Stacy and I will be discussing the importance of control in divorce, what the Big Six is, and how to move forward without escalating conflict. Welcome to the show, Stacy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, for our listeners, Stacy, would you share a little about yourself and, really, how did you end up and stay in the family law and divorce space?
So I'm born and raised in New York City, living in LA now in the middle of this horror. It's actually the first day in 5 days I've been home, voluntarily evacuated, but home, thank God, and I have a home. I grew up the daughter of a lawyer, the niece of a lawyer, the granddaughter of a lawyer, but I fought back to make sure that that's what I wanted to be, what I want to do with my career. And I went to Columbia Law School, and I took a class my second year called Family Law. They could have called it, looking behind you, you have a bullseye behind you, Bullseye Law. But we got to have a big lecture class and a workshop where you got to negotiate, draft, and go through a mock trial. And I wanted to be out of the classroom. I was sick of just sitting there having professors call on you and make you squirm. And for a whole host of reasons, I got the highest grade in the class. Not because of my brain, but because I pulled this book off the shelf in preparing for my exam. And sort of the rest is history. And I realized that my clients would then have a heartbeat. And that meant something to me. I know I make a difference.
Well, I am so happy to hear that. And it's true. We deal with individuals and we make a huge difference in their life every day when we're dealing in family law. Now, you've had a distinguished career as one of the top family law attorneys in the country. What inspired you to write Divorce, It's All About Control?
Well, I kept sitting there in meetings with the light bulb or the ding, ding, ding going off in my head when I kept saying the same thing. And I realized that I should share this because people are going to have these feelings, and why not talk about them and give them a sort of a place to be and go, one of those aha moments. And it's been really cool. I mean, it's a long time ago that I first wrote it. We're at 7th edition. Don't get too excited. I'm not retiring on the money for my book. But it sort of pulls it all together, and it's helped a bunch of people. I get notes from people all around the country and the world, frankly.
That's awesome. Now, in your book, you do emphasize the importance of control in the emotional, psychological, and legal aspects of divorce. And, what does control mean to you in this context?
Well, I also talk about control sort of outside and inside. We can only control ourselves. And it's how we react to what's going on to us and with us and for us and our children. So you can become a puddle, you can become overly aggressive, you can be thoughtful and manage it. I'm not saying it's easy. You can eat healthy, or you can overeat or starve yourself. You can work out, you can have no sleep. How they manage and how they control their divorce and how they move on with their lives can make or break a happy life. So it's really important in my mind to try to control yourself. And I give tools on how to do that. Certainly not perfect. And every person reacts differently to reactions and control by another person. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, money does do a lot of controlling.
It does indeed. Now, why do you think so many divorcing couples struggle with maintaining control during the process of divorce?
Because it's really easy to be triggered. If you have the other side who is waging a legal war, or is gaslighting you or is jabbing at you emotionally, it's really easy to react as opposed to respond. Many years ago, one of my favorite experts wrote on a Post-it for me, and I put it in my desk: respond, do not react. And I really believe that. And with texts and emails now, we often don't take the time to reflect. That's another R. And I will often write something and then hold it or give it to somebody else for one of those emotional reads. Am I too aggressive? Am I too angry? What's the best way to handle it? When I get a really aggressive letter, depending on who is sending it to me, I may very well write a really unaggressive letter because I don't want to be triggered. I sort of laugh and go, okay, that's how you're going to be. Go for it. But, you're not going to get a rise out of me. And that's the better way. I mean, the opposite of love is not hate. It's indifference.
Right. Yeah.
So when you get somebody who's trying to egg you on, as lawyers will try to do, as parties will try to do to each other, it's generally better, not always, to take a different road and not jab back. And how often if you see lawyers fighting with each other, they forgot what the clients are all about. They're just fighting with each other.
Agreed. And I think, that's the, respond, not react, taking the time. We live in such a, right, buy now, do it now, I texted you a minute ago, everything has to be instantaneous. And, a lot of times you've got to allow your brain and your rational side to catch up with, that instant emotional response. And it's so true. And I know it's hard, right? And particularly when you're in that romantic relationship that's now broken up, they always know what the triggers are. They always know what buttons to push. And because it's a pattern, right? And individuals, it's hard for them to break that, especially if they're really not being consciously advised or reminded of that. But, what are some strategies you recommend for staying emotionally grounded for folks going through this?
Have a really, really good therapist. That's number one. Don't overstay your welcome with your friends or your family. Work out your aggressions at the gym or start, taking a cooking class or a photography class or something to channel your creative side. Do not spend your life only doing your divorce stuff, but be sure to be quick in getting back to your lawyer, because otherwise it's going to sort of take over your life. Live your life. What's the best revenge? To live a really good life. Absolutely. And hopefully there won't be revenge, but live your life. Have a great life. You will be okay. You will not be okay if you don't let yourself be okay.
That is so true. Now, you've mentioned that compartmentalizing emotions from legal decisions is critical. And, for our listeners, give them maybe some tips on how they can achieve that, because we know emotions are running high. But I'd love to hear you unpack that for us.
I didn't quite get the question.
No, well, you've talked about, in your book, you got to compartmentalize your emotions from legal decisions. And that's really critical. And, emotions go high in a divorce. How do we, we're telling them, it's kind of like somebody's afraid, but yet how can we help them learn how to compartmentalize the emotions from the legal decisions?
Well, that's part of the job of a therapist. Do you remember when you were in college, but you may be too young to remember this, where you would call home on Sundays? We didn't have cell phones, and you'd make a list. Well, when you're talking to your lawyer, don't constantly call and text and email. Most of my clients do, but it's really expensive. Organize your thoughts. Get on the phone or email in a very organized fashion if you can. Most of us who are good divorce lawyers know how to be empathetic and hold somebody's hand. At the same time, it's really expensive. And your therapist is generally less expensive and better equipped at that, although I do have clients who say I do a better job. But that's not my skill set. I am not a therapist. Right. Talk to your lawyer, talk to your therapist, and you can test it out. You can test out overreacting, reacting, and responding and see what it does. I have also found, and I've done this with lawyers, and God forbid any of my opposing counsels are listening to this. I remember vividly, I was sitting in an airport and my opposing counsel just kept sending me text after text, and I wasn't responding. And she was just worrying herself into a frenzy. And I realized that by my not responding, she just eventually had to stop, and she was egging herself on. And I just watched. And I learned something from that. Thank God that was 20 something years ago. But I had to test it because my initial reaction was, oh, back I go with my text. But try different things to try to control the environment as best you can. Not everything is controllable. I don't want people to walk away thinking they read my book and they've got it all in a little box with a little book. It's not like that. But hopefully I will give people tools to try different things and see what works for them.
And I love that because, everybody's different. In your book, you talk about the big 6 categories of control. Can you briefly explain what they are and why they play such a critical role in the breakdown of relationships?
Well, it's really interesting. I don't always remember the big 6 anymore.
Okay.
I really have focused on health.
Okay.
Somebody in the relationship is ill, and that can bring people together or drive them apart, or somebody is ill and gets better, and that changes the dynamic. Wealth. You start off, and this I see all the time, where couples start off sort of on an equal footing wealth-wise in their career. They may have nothing. They both have, good jobs, and one skyrockets and one plateaus. And when it's the woman who skyrockets and the man who plateaus, it doesn't last very long. Unless that is something they talk about and they agree to together. I have many friends who the women are the working person and the husband stays home. And they have great relationships, but they've talked about that and worked it through. I have many female clients who didn't sign up to be the primary breadwinner, primary caretaker of the kids, with their husband sitting on the couch or going to play now pickleball. That doesn't work because that's not what they wanted. People grow up differently. If you don't grow in sort of together, then that changes. If you have an overbearing family member, a mother or mother-in-law, et cetera, that can really interfere. Abuse, of course, if somebody is abusive, that's a form of control. We now have coercive control, which you can hurt somebody, abuse somebody just with your words or with restricting money. You don't have to lay a finger on them. Form of control. Infidelity. But interestingly, infidelity, more people in my empirical study are willing to work through. But I've also found, looking at older couples, and this is not unusual, where they've been together for a very, very long time. They have grandkids together. And more often than not, the wife is very unhappy and is emotionally abusive, maybe having affairs, but they don't want to break up their family. They don't want to give up their status and stature in the community. They don't want to have the fear of living not the same lifestyle. So they turn their face and they just suck it up and live their life. I remember vividly, I had a woman sitting with me. She was an example of that. And then I was invited to a fundraiser, and the 2 of them were at my table. I had to pretend I didn't know her.
Right.
And I'm looking at the husband thinking, oh, I know a lot about you. But they were together because she made a choice, and I respect that choice. I also had an elderly client when I was quite a young lawyer, and he had Parkinson's. He was in his 70s. He had been married for close to 40 years. And he said that a happy person cannot make a depressed person happy, but a depressed person can make a happy person depressed. He said if he stayed at home, his wife would have just basically killed him long before the Parkinson's did, because it was eking out of his soul. So he moved into an apartment out of the big house, got divorced, and was going to be on his own with Parkinson's. But that was healthier for him than being in the big house with a woman who just eked his soul out.
Wow. Well, and I think that's such a good point, because there is that quality of life. And there is the fear of like the social status, the changes in the family, certainly finances, but yet your quality of life, your health, your mental health, sometimes that you can't put, well, I don't think you can put a price on it. And I think for some people, that's really is the straw that breaks the camel. They're like, okay, this is the one thing I can control, how I feel and my emotions. So I need to put myself in a place that is healthier and better.
Yes. And if you're in a financially abusive relationship, a physically abusive relationship, an emotionally or psychologically abusive relationship, my advice is to get the heck out.
Absolutely.
And then you have to balance, is this worth it? Because if you are living in fear, whatever that means to you, then it's going to shorten your life. We all know that.
Yeah.
But each person gets to make their choice. I'm a believer in choice across the board.
I agree. Now, in your book, you also mention, the concept of fighting like a surgeon, right? Using precision rather than brute force. I love that. I think it's really a good example, but I'd love for you to explain that a little bit more to our listeners, like how that applies to navigating a divorce.
You have to be careful. You've got to pick your battles. You've got to be clever about it. And sometimes going to court, you give the judge many options so that there's something for the judge to hang their, towel on, so to speak. But you have to be thoughtful about it. People say to me, oh, it's a community property state. Don't you just divide it down the middle? Like, it's not as simple as that. You got to deal with taxes. You have to deal with valuations. You have to deal with what's separate, what's community. And so you have to be careful and surgical about it. I have watched some cross-examinations that were works of art. They were so carefully done. And they don't have to be long. They just have to be clever.
Yeah. And I think sometimes, and just like what you mentioned earlier, and I think that's important because a lot of times, our clients don't understand that often that, aggressive letter, when you try to neutralize, but your response is really better in the long run for your client. And especially when you have that trusting relationship with your attorney and they say, no, this is the better way to respond. Right. And trust me, because I'm looking at your end goal and this is really the better way for us to get there. A lot of times clients, they want the big blustering, yelling person because that's what they feel they need. And a lot of times that's just not very effective. No. I don't think it's very effective at all. But
if you read chapter 4, we talk about the different types of lawyers. I see myself as my client's partner. I hold their hand. I educate them. I tell them what I think, but it's ultimately their decision. I'm not there to go, okay, dearie, pat you on the head and I'll tell you in 6 months, or just go, what do you want to do? I want to guide them. And I am pretty regularly saying to clients, can you sleep on that? I don't agree with that decision. I think upon reflection, you may not agree. So let's sleep on it and let's talk about it further the next day. And more often than not, the client comes back and says, you were right. I thought about it. But the sad part is when people are going through a divorce, for the most part, they're in a fugue state. I mean, their life is turned upside down. They don't know which way is right. They're used to a certain way of life, and that has changed, whatever that is. You're not going out on Saturday night with your spouse. You may be living in a separate place. Your money may be different. It may not be. And as a result, they're in a fugue state. And yet we're asking them to make the most important decisions of their lives. Wow. I mean, I know just dealing with these fires and being voluntarily evacuated, my head was spinning. And I consciously over the weekend said, I can't work. I'm not going to be doing a service to my clients. I recommend The Gilded Age.
Okay, good.
Talk about saving face and a position in society. But it was a good escape for me from the horrors that are going on. And luckily, I still have my home. I was at a friend's home. She still has her home. But there are times you need to take a deep breath and do something else and give yourself time to think. Unfortunately, sometimes there's not a lot of time to think. And we're pushing clients to have to make decisions when they're not ready to make decisions. And it's that balance. That's why I like to work with my client's therapist, because if I'm saying, okay, we don't have enough information, and the therapist is saying, oh, my client needs to get this over with and move on, we're at a loggerjam. We need to work together to talk it through with the client/patient. Or we'll say, this is a good offer, we should move on it. And the therapist says, client's not ready for it. Okay, how do we deal with that? And it's better to work cooperatively with the therapist rather than butting heads. And if you're not talking to the therapist and the client is going to see the therapist, the client's head's spinning because they're getting two different recommendations.
Now, and I like in your book, you do talk about, finding the right lawyer. And I would like to expand on that because I think I completely agree. You need to be in alignment and understand what, I think, what, not only the personality, but hey, how are we going to, what's your philosophy on how to proceed on this particular case? And, sometimes you have to pivot. It doesn't turn out exactly like you think, but what do you advise for our listeners, like some things they should think about when they are looking for a lawyer?
Well, it's
for
funny.
their divorce?
In my book, they should interview lawyers. Just like you pick a pediatrician, you pick a therapist, or you pick a coach. You want somebody who you feel comfortable, or a best friend, frankly, somebody you can feel comfortable calling and listening to and talking through something that does not make you feel intimidated, does not make you feel stupid, is willing to take the time, does not make you feel rushed. I am still really close to a 3-time client of mine, but he tells the story that when he first met me, I acted as if he was the only person in the world and I had all the time for him. Here we are, 3 divorces later, and now he's completely happily married to the right woman for him. So find the lawyer that you feel you can click with. I had a bunch of years ago 2 women in pretty quick succession who did not hire me. One called me back a few months later and she said, I made a mistake. I thought my husband would only respect a man. And to be blunt, she hired a man who was just like her husband.
Like her husband. Abusive. So treated her like that as well.
Yep. I had another woman call me, and I had heard through the grapevine that she did not hire me because she thought I was a barracuda. And she came back a bunch of months later and said, I need that now. I pick how to be with that client and with that opposition. I can be very litigious. I can be very solution oriented. I'm always solution oriented, but how do you get there? But not everything's pedal to the metal. In some cases, if you do that, you're going to blow up the case that could have been easily resolved. But I got a call from a woman today. She got a notice, which we can do out here, that she is to put together an income and expense declaration. That is post-judgment, where her husband, who's paying alimony, spousal support, can look at it and consider moving to reduce support if what she's making is more than what she was making before, or if his income is less, etc. So I know the opposing counsel. He has some significant health issues. And he sold a company. It was part of a $100 million sale. Like, why are you doing this? He said, we didn't know she had health issues. We didn't know she retired. And he said, let me talk to him. And I said, this would be the best non-client I ever had if I could make this go away by a phone call. Because people don't know facts. And if I could have just taken her money and fill out the income and expense declaration and then gone to war, when my instincts were, this doesn't make sense to me. So I picked up the phone. I've done that with keeping marriages together. If a client says, or potential client says, I really don't want this divorce, with permission, I pick up the phone, call the other side. Can we help this family? Can you talk to your client? Can we send them to therapy? I've saved a few marriages that way. Yep.
And I think that happens. Sometimes it takes like getting to the attorney's office. We've certainly had reconciliations as well for people to really realize maybe that's not what they want. But now, for women, particularly those in high net worth divorce, and how can they assert their power without escalating conflict, do you think?
To be thoughtful, to work well with a lawyer, to think things through, to respond and not react. All the things we've talked about today, this is sort of like the bow on it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard. I don't want anybody listening to think, oh, this is easy to do. It's hard. It's hard for the lawyers. We get an email or a text. We want to, respond in kind. But we got to hold ourselves back sometimes to be thoughtful about it and figure out what's the best way to handle this. And that's why I have partners. Because I found myself, okay, I'm reacting this way, but is that the wisest? And I will convene my team and say, okay, what do you think? What should we do? And we talk about it, and generally speaking, the result of that discussion is a much better plan than either of us would have come up with individually. However, my team knows that sometimes, no matter how much they push at me, I just have this intuition that we have to do something a certain way. And I'm very clear. And I'll say, I really appreciate hearing what you have to say. This is one of the few times where it's the way we're going to do it. And if it fails, it's on me. It's completely on me. Yeah, the reason I've done that is I have found in the past when I've let somebody talk me out of my strong intuition, another, female skill, I think. To trust yourself, and sometimes women don't. So that's part of the empowerment is to encourage women to trust their instincts and to communicate what they're thinking. They know their spouse better than we do, although that person that they were married to was not the person who they thought he was. He's never going to go to court because of this. And I'm like, anytime a client says that, it has never been right. Never. And sadly, because most women think that the husband doesn't want to be embarrassed in court. But my empirical study, and I represent equally men and women, is that they don't really care about that. They care about winning. They care about squishing. They care about making their point. They care about their money.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Maybe a little hyperbolic here, but that's my empirical study.
Now, let's talk a little bit about co-parenting, because that can become a whole nother, issue and battlefield for control, certainly. How do you advise clients and, women listening to navigate those challenges successfully?
That's the hardest, because it's so easy to take little things, and they are little in the grand scheme of life, Thanksgivings, and it feels awful. But you have to realize it in the bigger picture. Again, I keep saying this, it's hard. And if you're having a holiday without your kids, it breaks your heart. But part of divorce is building new memories together. Whether it's on Thursday or Friday, if you're together and you're around the table, whether it's a turkey or a ham or a duck or whatever it is, if you're together, that's what's important. And the new memories, building together, just keep that in mind. People have memories as a intact family and then separate. I remember my daughter telling me that her friends were very confused because their dad and I were divorced. I love my ex-husband. I love his wife, truly. And we would do a lot of holidays or like invite them over. And so her friends were confused. They're divorced, but you do holidays together. And when we stopped doing that, it was not my choice. I would have preferred all of us to still be together because we were still a family. And we still are a family.
Right.
We just had a grandson, and my former husband and I were there together, joined at the hip, which is wonderful. And I'm blessed, and I wish that on others. It doesn't always work that way. And that's why lawyers like me are in the picture. Because if it worked that way all the time, I would be doing something else for a living.
Yeah, exactly. Now, how have you seen clients grow or transform through the divorce process, like when they're able to follow?
That's the best part, where clients come in terrified, really don't know anything about their finances, or they do. And by the time the process is over, they can hold themselves high. They feel good about their lives. It may not be the same. They may be living the same opulent lifestyle, or they've had to change their lifestyle, go from private school for their kids to public, but they've made a home, they've made a life. Maybe they go back to work. You need a hobby. Your kid's not going to be with you all the time. You need to do something else. And most resist, but if they listen and eventually listen, then they have a fulfilled life. That's what you want. Live your life. Again, that's the best revenge. Have a great life.
Now, do you have like one of the most rewarding cases or a memory of something that really came from maybe a difficult place and then had a resolution and you got to be a part of that?
Yeah. What comes to mind is I had a client and his wife was pretty awful and accusing him of abusing the kids. He did no such thing. Went through more trials and hearings, and eventually he wisely said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not doing it to my kids. And I said to him, when your kids go to college, they will be back because they will need you. He married my best friend. I introduced him. And eventually his kids were incredibly close to her and figured out what their mom had done. So it doesn't always work out that way. And I feel badly for her, but she did it to herself.
Right.
And the kids were put in the middle, and God bless him, like King David, and the woman who said, take the child, I'm not going to cut the child in half. So he did the right thing, in my opinion. I've had a number of cases where more often the dad will walk away after really fighting hard. And in every one of those cases, the kids came around.
Now, before we go, Stacy, it's been a great conversation. Can you impart on our listeners what you've learned about women and their resilience throughout your career and experience?
I love watching the growth. Even the women who are the primary breadwinner and generally the primary caretaker of the kids, to sort of figure out how to be okay navigating that and get over it that they're paying money to their ex.
Yeah.
I'm a huge supporter of women and elevating women. I also find children are incredibly resilient, but I also believe that kids are the collateral damage in a divorce. And I tried very hard not to put the kids in the middle. But for your listeners, you have it in you. Have a good lawyer, have a good therapist, work out, have fun with your friends, have fun, have a life. You will get through this if you let yourself.
And that is such great advice. It's so true. But you got to let yourself be able to get through it and allow yourself, some time for yourself to work on your health. Now, lastly, Stacy, where can our listeners find you for more information and resources?
I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. I'm a partner at Blank Rome. I'm all over the internet. Stacy D. Phillips. Stacy D. Phillips. If you just look me up, it's there. Don't confuse me with other Stacy Phillipses. There are other Stacy Phillipses. I'm Stacy D. Phillips. But just remember Blank Rome. I'm a partner at Blank Rome. And
well, there you go. And we'll make sure the links are in the show notes for sure.
And I wrote my book, Divorce, It's All About Control, How to Win the Emotional, Psychological, and Legal Wars.
Absolutely. Well, we've reached the end of our show today. Thank you so much, Stacy Phillips, for joining us to discuss the importance of control in divorce, how to recognize and address subtle control struggles throughout the concept of the Big Six, and practical advice for empowering women to assert their power, reframe divorce as a transformative process, and move forward without escalating the conflict. Thank you so much.
Heather, you're great. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Listeners, if you or someone you know in the Northeast Florida area is going through or even thinking about divorce, you're not alone. Taking that first step can feel overwhelming. But it doesn't have to be. Our newsletter is filled with actionable advice tailored to guide you through this process. By signing up, you'll gain the tools to face the unknown with courage and see if we're the right fit to support you during this life-changing time. Don't wait. Click the link in the show notes, fill out the form, and take the first step toward building a brighter future today.